75 degrees in the middle of March? Who said that was okay? Am I doing a video near the end of Q1 in 2024 of my favorite horror books I read last year? Yes, I am. Also, before we get into the books, my shirt, introverted but willing to discuss horror books. Yeah, that's right. So I have 15 books to share with you. I'm going to go in order in which I read them. So there's only one out of the 15 that I don't have a wrap up for because it was before I started doing BookTube, but all the rest I will have the wrap ups linked down below. So I'll have the timestamps as usual, and I'll put that particular wrap up like in that same area with the timestamp. So if you're interested in any more details about the books, you can just easily find it right there. So starting out with the first favorite horror book that I read in 2023, I think I might have read this in like February or March before I started BookTube. So unfortunately no wrap up for that, but I absolutely love this book. And a little funny story about it is I was at Barnes & Noble. I was there for 2 books in particular, and I couldn't find, oh, actually I was there for 3. That's right. I couldn't find the first 2. I found the third, but I'm like, you know what? I was still set on getting 3 books. And so I just browsed around. I went to the fantasy section, and I ended up reading a little bit of Middle Game. And the first page, I was like, oh, this is going to be a 5-star. I'm going to get this book. Yeah, that was a 5-star. And then I went over to the horror section, and I saw this book. I started reading the first page, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be another 5-star. And I'm so glad that I didn't find the other 2 books I was looking for, because it turns out I probably would not have liked those. So I'm so happy I got Middle Game. That will be, spoiler alert, in my favorite fantasy books of last year. But one of my favorite horror books that I read last year is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and I got the deluxe penguin edition. So it has this cool cover. It continues on the back there. It has some cool stuff on the French flap, and then it has the deckled edges, which I personally really like. And of course, a little black kitty cat. So in this book, we follow a couple young sisters. One's 18 and the other one I think is a little older than that. And when they're out in town, they get really nasty looks from the neighbors, and that's because the rest of their family is dead. And that's because something suspicious happened. And there's some rumors going around that one of the sisters may have had something to do with it. This is like what I would consider a quiet creep, where it's like, it seems kind of normal, but just maybe something's a little off. And then the more you read, the more you discover, like, I'm side-eyeing these characters. What's going on here? And just little by little, you find out that there is something disturbing going on here. And then all is revealed at the end, of course, and I love this book so much. The writing is immaculate, atmospheric, haunting, really interesting characters. I love the setting of their house and like how they're kind of isolated, secluded a little bit. Also, Constance, the main character, she loves books, and that's one of the things that it opens with, was that she had a bunch of books on the counter, and if she had known that those would be the last book she was going to get, she may have gotten different books. And I was like, what? Now my intrigue is piqued. I gotta know what's up with this. So if you have not read this yet, I highly recommend it. I have also read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. That did not make it to my favorites list. And that one just didn't really do it for me. I'll probably reread it later this year. And if you've read that book and you didn't really vibe with it, but you haven't read this yet, I definitely recommend this one. This book I read in June, and it is not only one of my favorite horror books, it's one of my favorite books of all time, also one of my favorite covers of all time, and that is Head Like a Hole by Andrew Van Wey. I mean, just check that out. So freaking cool. And you know, Head Like a Hole, like the 9 Inch Nails song. Now, I was of a certain age in the 90s, so this is extremely relevant to me. If you grew up in the 90s, if you're a child or a teenager in the 90s, you will love the nostalgia that you get from this book. And this book, Andrew wastes no time getting to the horror. I'm talking like the first page, he hits you with it, okay? This was so good. I was seriously hooked from the first page. There's this guy who pulls something interesting out of the water, and it's supposed to be dead, but it's talking to him and telling him to do things. And there's another main character that we're following by the name of Megan, and it has a really cool twist at the end. Now, I guessed what was going on, but that did not take away from my enjoyment of this book at all. In fact, I loved that the author did that, and he did it so good. He did it justice. And truly, the synopsis on the back just is written so well and really gives the vibes for it. So I'm just going to read it because nothing else can say it as well as this. When you bury your past, make sure that it's dead. It's the mid-90s. Grunge and flannel are fading as the Spice Girls and Hot Topic conquer the malls. Cherry gloss glistens on the lips of the youth. Modems hiss as America comes online, and in a fog-drenched cove at the end of New England, something terrible awakens when a fisherman reels in a gruesome catch. The remains of a young woman. Remains still pulsing with furious life. For Megan Monroe and her friends, this is how their nightmare begins. A wet whisper over their shoulder. A dark hand reaching out from the edge of their sight, and a name clawing at the back of their minds. A young woman scratched from their memory. To stop this devouring terror, Megan will need to mend broken friendships and reassemble her fractured past, for what stalks them hungers to remake itself in their image, piece by bloody piece. I mean, mid-90s, the mall, grunge, flannel, cherry lip gloss. Say no more. I used to listen to Nine Inch Nails all the time. I actually saw them a couple times in concert. Have any of you, did you used to listen to Nine Inch Nails, or have you seen them in concert? Head like a hoe, black as your soul. I'd rather die than give you control. Sorry, got a little carried away there. What books I read in July, and the first one is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I love this cover, like the bright neon green. And I've heard that this reacts to a certain kind of light, so I think it's black light. I think this will glow with black light. Unfortunately, I don't have one, otherwise I would try it out because that seems so cool. But anyway, this is about a haunted house, and I love haunted house stories. In this, we follow Maggie, who is going back to her childhood home, and she's going back there because it's being sold in an estate sale. Her father just passed away, and she's going to live there while it's being renovated. And there's some rumors about what happened at this house because they moved in this Victorian house, and they only stayed there for like 3 weeks, and then they fled in the night. And she gets more details from this book that her dad wrote called House of Horrors. Because she was a kid when she lived there, she doesn't remember any kind of specifics of what was going on. And so she doesn't know whether to believe the claims or not. She doesn't know, is there something really going on, or is my dad just making this up for his book? But when she lives there, she finds out. And this book is really cool because you get excerpts of that book in here, House of Horrors. So it goes back and forth between this novel and then the novel that her dad wrote, so you get to learn little by little. They play really well off each other, and you slowly find out whether there was any validity to his claims that this was a haunted house. This was really good, really spooky, and I will probably end up rereading this one. And that's right, we have another Andrew Van Wey book with another cool cover by The Light of Dead Stars. And this one has a little bit of cosmic horror as well. It had a little bit of cosmic horror. And in this we follow a couple characters, mainly an uncle and his niece. And I love their relationship. The uncle is actually one of my favorite characters. You'd think like, oh, there's going to be something weird going on here. He's going to be abusive. He's going to be despondent. He's not going to be involved. But something really crazy happens with their parents right when you start. Again, just like with Head Like a Hole, he gets right into the horror on the first page. And so something really traumatic happens with her parents. She's there. She loses both of her parents in an accident. And so he is fighting to take custody of her. Otherwise, she's going to end up going with the grandparents. And the grandparents, no, that would not be good. They're not good people. So he is fighting and doing his best to go ahead and take her in and give her a better life. And just like with Head Like a Hole, this one has a really cool synopsis on the back. It's a little shorter, so I'll just go ahead and read it. On the Lost Coast, something should never be found. When tragedy shatters 13-year-old Zelda Ruiz's adolescence, she retreats with her Uncle Mark to the bucolic town of Greywood Bay. It's a chance to heal, a chance to build a new life together. But nothing can prepare them for the malignant terror long coveting these lands. It looms over redwood groves and lurks among the foundations of homes. It festers in the dark hearts of the wounded, and now this cosmic horror has found a new weapon, a means to worm its way into our world, To save their community and each other, Zelda and Mark will need to confront their darkest demons, both inside and out. For what stalks Greywood Bay hungers for suffering above all else. There's something really creepy in particular that I remember about this book. There's like a weird thing going on in a basement. That's where like the cosmic horror comes into play. Another awesome horror book with some really cool characters. Really enjoyed this. Highly recommended, especially if you liked Head Like a Hole, because I have seen that a couple of people so far have read that. I think more people should read that book, but if you've read that already, you should definitely read this one. Another favorite horror book that I read in July is one that I would love to see as a 3D movie. Oh, there's one scene in particular that will forever be burned in my brain, and that is from Below by Darcy Coates, and this is ocean horror. And in this, we have a ship that disappeared mysteriously 60 years ago. Well, they stumbled upon a garbled message and they were able to finally discover the location of the ship. So they send an expedition down there to go investigate and see if they can find out what happened. So this is basically like a haunted house story, but instead of a haunted house, it's a haunted sunken ship. And this is so good. I mean, that goes without saying. It's on my favorite horror books of last year. But this is a favorite of all time. Also, they don't waste any time getting into the water. It's like right away. Nothing like what Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant was with that book. Oh, that one was so disappointing. And it took forever to get into the water. So if you've read Into the Drowning Deep and you were disappointed by it like I was, and you haven't read this, I highly recommend reading this one if you love ocean horror. There's no killer mermaids, but there are ghouls. So that is what they stumble upon when they're investigating, and oh, it is so descriptive and atmospheric. It's claustrophobia inducing. All they have are these little headlamps, and sometimes they don't work. And that's not too convenient because they're trying to maneuver their way through unfamiliar territory and things that could snag on their suits. There's ghouls that are grabbing at them. Something that helps build the creep factor is you get a back and forth between present day and 60 years ago. So you get background on what actually happened on this ship 60 years ago. So as you find out more, then the characters in real time are discovering something, and then you find out more in the past, and then the characters are discovering more in the current timeline. It is so good, so well done. This book is almost 500 pages. I think I read it in like 3 or 4 days. And like I said, I would love to see this as a 3D movie. It would be absolutely terrifying and probably one of my favorite movies of all time. Now, I love ocean horror. It's one of my favorite subgenres of horror. So if you have any recommendations for me, if you've read any other ocean horror, please let me know. I would love to read some more. And if you've read any books from Darcy Coates and you have any favorites, let me know as well, because I've only read 2 of her books so far, and I'd love to read some more. There's a couple I have on my radar: The Haunting of Lee Harker, and is it Gallows Hill? And then The Haunting of Ashburn House. I think those are the few that I have on my radar. But I'm curious what your favorites are. Another haunted house story, I said I love these kinds of stories, is episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. And in this, we follow a husband and wife team. So they go to investigate at this derelict mansion where they used to do bizarre experiments in the 1970s. And well, they end up finding out that, yeah, there's something haunted going on here. And this is really fun because it has a mixed media element to it. So that's really cool. You get like transcripts from the shows, emails, things like that. So it really adds to the feeling like you're watching a TV show in a way. And I think I've heard that the audiobook for this is really good as well. I haven't listened to it, but if you're an audiobook listener, I've heard that that is a really good one to listen to. And the more they investigate, the more they uncover, and there is this particular thing that happens, and once they discover this one thing, oh, it just spirals. It spirals out of control, and it sucks because my favorite thing about this book I can't really talk about because it would be a spoiler, but I will say that it references the myth of Sisyphus. And it's interesting because the month before, in June, I read Ascension, which is a sci-fi. In that book, it also references the myth of Sisyphus, but in that one you're going up, and in this one you're going in a different direction. but it still plays around with that myth. And I just love what they did with it, especially the ending. I know the ending can be a little controversial. Some people don't like it. I loved it. I think it was brilliant, very unique, unexpected. And if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. I realized I actually have one more book for July. So I actually had 5 favorite horror books that I read in July. So pretty good month. Oh, I think I know why. I participated in a few readathons over the summer, and one of those was Summerween, so there you go, that makes sense. But I'm still keeping the total amount of books at 15 because I swapped it out for another one that I feel like I like this one better. And that is Fantastic Land by Mike Bakovich. I guess this could be considered like a thriller slash horror, although I would say it's definitely horrific. And in this, it's set at an amusement park in Florida, and there is this hurricane that just ravages the Florida coast, and basically a bunch of people get trapped inside this amusement park. They supposedly have an emergency plan, but nothing ever really works, and they kind of split off into different groups, and there's a battle for food and medicine, supplies in general. This is told in a unique way through more like a fact-finding investigation and interviews. So you're getting information from the survivors. So I will say that kind of takes away a little bit of the tension just because you know who survives because of who is giving the information. But it is still absolutely terrifying because this is so realistic. If you want to read something that will actually scare you and possibly give you nightmares like it did me, yeah, this is really good. Some people think, oh, that couldn't really happen. Like, don't y'all remember Hurricane Katrina? I know I would not fare well in that kind of situation. Trapped in an amusement park, cut off from communication from the rest of the world, you're just left with a bunch of people, mostly teenagers. That's terrifying already to think about. Just trapped in this isolated setting with people who think they can do whatever they want because there's not going to be consequences from their actions and behavior. And they go through this, and they're stuck in this amusement park for 5 weeks. This has been described as like Lord of the Flies meets Battle Royale. No, I have read Lord of the Flies. I haven't read Battle Royale yet, but I understand the premise, and it's basically a bunch of kids that have to kill each other off. So that gives you a little hint at what goes on in here. And the things that it suggests are seriously horrific. And if you haven't read this yet, and especially if you like things set at amusement parks or abandoned amusement parks, kind of like survival horror, but in a unique setting and told in a unique way, I highly recommend Fantastic Land. Next 2 books I read in August, and the first one is At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott, and this is a short story collection, and I hadn't been a huge short story reader before I read this, and this converted me. Now I love short stories, especially horror short stories. This is fantastic. It takes somewhat mundane events, situations, and it just flips them on their head. Some of these really creep me out, especially one in particular. I was just stunned for like a couple minutes straight after reading it. I was just like, whoa, just kept thinking about it. That is so trippy. So, like I said, 14 stories, and just briefly, I'll tell you kind of what each one is about. It's like one sentence per story. A lonely woman finds an unlikely companion when she discovers that her new house is haunted. A couple's mundane argument quickly evolves into a night of terror. A harried wife finds herself the victim of her husband's pranks when he launches a successful YouTube channel. An antisocial teenager encounters a mysterious new world when he begins looking into the windows of his neighbors' homes. A mourning widow is forced to relive her husband's death when he begins calling her daily on her cell phone. A happily married man turns his life upside down when he sends a Facebook friend request to an old college flame that no longer remembers him. A woman sets a trap for her runaway cat and is horrified to discover what she has actually captured. And in the concluding novella, Emil Bones, a librarian, regrets the day she reads a mysterious little book left behind in the library's Dropbox. Even if you're not sure you like short stories, if you like horror, I would highly recommend this. You can just read like one story at a time, you know, read a book. When you finish that, then read one of the stories, and then you read another book, read another story, do something like that. That's typically how I do my stories. So yeah, At Home with the Horrors, highly recommend. And the next one is a favorite book of all time. I had a lot of fun with this one, and that's The Mary Shelley Club by Golden Moldavisky. And it's a nice little chunky one. This was really fun, and it has references to Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, of course. And in this, we follow Rachel, who's a new girl at the school, and she's having trouble kind of fitting in. And she is big into horror movies, and she finds great comfort in that. And she gets kind of tied up in this prank gone awry, but it gets the attention from a club there, the Mary Shelley Club. And what they do, they have these things called fear tests, and they have pranks that are based on horror tropes. So she gets recruited into this club, and they start doing these pranks, and they get a little more intense each time, and then something really goes wrong. And it seems like people are killing people, and so they have to figure out who's doing it. Is it somebody in the group? Is it her? Like, what's going on? It's like somebody is targeting the group as a whole, and there's different secrets in the past that people are scared might come out. So this was really fun, and I think it's a YA horror, but if you just want a fun horror book that is like Gossip Girl meets Scream, highly recommend. These next two books I read in September, and the first one is Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. I love Grady Hendrix. I've read a few books by him so far. I have a couple more I still have to read, but I love this one because he's so cheeky. It's made to look like an IKEA catalog, but it has like creepy things on it. It even has the layout of the store on there. And then the beginning of each chapter, it has furniture with a little explanation. And as you go through the book and get towards the end, the furniture gets weirder and weirder. And it's related to what's going on. So in this, we have this IKEA store basically that weird things are happening there overnight. So when they get there for their morning shift, there are things that are destroyed, smashed, shattered, and they review the security tapes and they can't find anything. They don't see anything. So they're like, well, that's really weird. You know what? We're going to post up here overnight, and we're going to camp out, and we're just going to patrol overnight and try to catch them in the act and get them to stop doing this. So they investigate overnight, and they end up running into some horrific things. This has a little bit of a labyrinth feel because the layout of the store, you know, I mean, they're kind of made to be that way to where it's hard to get out. Like, it just keeps you going like in a maze, basically. And there's also a little bit of portal fantasy in it because there are things that appear that didn't used to be there. It's like a haunted house story, but it's a furniture store instead. This one I feel is totally underrated. I think a lot of people talk about his other books more, but if you like a cheeky, kind of humorous, dark humor horror, I highly recommend Horror Store. So The Midnight Companions, and on most Saturdays at 12 a.m. in the early 1990s, you could find us at Ricky's place. The customs of our little club were uncomplicated. Each time we met, each one of us would tell a scary story. And it damn well better be scarier than whatever was told at the last meeting. And that's from Midnight Companions Volume 1. This is by Luke Flaherty and illustrated by Nathaniel Hebert. Really cool illustrations. It's set in like an 80s style, and it's super cute and little. And really nice pages too. They're kind of glossy. The illustrations are really cool. They got that like old school 80s vibe. And then in the house, and so one of the stories that the kids are telling, I think it's like a group of teenagers or something, and they're meeting and telling this scary story about something that happens at this house. Well, it happens to be a house, like a real house. And so they're like, you know what? Let's go to the house, the actual house, and we're going to continue telling the stories there. Well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, because then stuff actually starts happening at this house, and it just gets wild. This is so good. I think if you like Grady Hendrix, you would really enjoy this because there are some pretty gross things in this, but also funny. I actually found this on Instagram because one of the Bookstagram pages that I follow had posted a picture of it and I was intrigued by it and I checked it out. I actually got the second one as well. I think they come out with one a year, but I definitely like this one. This is my favorite. So if you want a unique, gross, cozy kind of horror, highly recommend. Three books I read in October, and I have two from the same author, and that would be Rachel Harrison. So the first book that I love is a favorite horror book is Cackle, and this is a witchy book. We have a young lady who has had a major change in her life, so she moves to a smaller town. She ends up befriending somebody who is treated a little bit weirdly by people, and slowly she realizes that, oh, she may be a witch. This would be considered more like a cozy horror story, and I found the main character pretty relatable. I mean, I tabbed a lot, and Rachel, she's just so good at putting certain feelings into words. It's like I would read it and I'd be like, yeah, exactly. That's described exactly right. That's exactly what it feels like. And I did giggle at some parts. And, you know, if you've read Rachel Harrison, you know she kind of has a little bit of like a sarcastic tone, which I enjoy. And also, the witch, she has an animal companion, a little spider called Ralph. And I never thought that I would think a spider as cute, but Ralph is so cute. In one of the scenes, he's wearing a top hat and a bow tie. So cute. If you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted and not so much like in your face horror, but you like something a little witchy and autumnal, highly recommend Cackle. And the other Rachel Harrison book is Black Sheep. And in this, we follow another young lady, and she has left her family behind. She's moved away and gotten a new life, gotten away from them because they are in a cult, and she doesn't agree with that cult. And I won't say what it is because you really need to discover it for yourself. If anybody tells you what the cult is about, they have spoiled it for you. It's a lot more fun to find out on your own. So she doesn't agree with the cult, so she's left, and then she gets invited to go back for a wedding. And it's one of her old friends and the guy that she used to date, and she kind of has some feelings about it. She doesn't like it too much, but she's like, you know what? I just need to go back there for the wedding and, you know, be a better person and just go and do it. So she goes back there and she starts getting a little bit more roped back into the cult, not like in an active way, but more so like they want her back or somebody wants her back for a reason because one of them must have sent her the invitation. And so they must want her back in their lives, right? Well, there are some really crazy things that happen in here. So I would consider this also cozy horror. I also tabbed quite a bit in this one as well. Really good quotes in this. I would say if you grew up in a pretty religious household or maybe have some kind of dealings with cults in a way, you may really like this. It kind of pokes fun at all of that and turns it on its head. So I had a lot of fun with this one. What was that, Penny? Can I finish? I'm almost done with the video. Anyway, last favorite book for October was The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. This cover is so cool. The flowers continue on the back here. Some of the words are a little raised as well. And then on the inside, the end pages right here, it's like a honeycomb texture. I don't know if you could see that. Like kind of washes it out, but it's a yellow, like a honeycomb texture. And I tabbed a lot in this book. This is a really fun one. Beautiful writing too. The descriptions of everything, immaculate. And in this book, it starts out with the horror right away. There is a set of twins, and one is female, the other is male, but identifies as gender fluid. So Caroline, the sister, she ends up dying, and in a suspicious manner. And Mars, her brother, who is gender fluid, he thinks that there is something more to it. And so he sets out to do his own investigation. So he goes to the summer camp that she would always go to because he feels like it's somehow connected to that group of girls that she would hang out with over there, because once she started hanging out with them, things got a little weird. So he goes to investigate. And this group of girls are called the Honeys because the cabin that they stay at, there is a beehive behind there. And so they take care of the bees and the beehives. And there is something weird that happens with that. And it's kind of trippy, almost fever dream like, and the descriptions are really cool. And it turns out that things are not exactly as they seem. This is a really beautiful book. I almost didn't read it, but I'm so glad I did. If you like a book that's set at a summer camp and kind of gives culty vibes a little bit, you may enjoy The Honeys. When the cops arrive, only a few things are clear. 4 girls entered a dangerous cave. 3 of them came out alive. 2 of them were rushed to the hospital, and 1 is soaked in blood and ready to talk. And that is from the book I read in December, and that is Into the Sublime by K.A. Borman. And this is set in a cave system. We have 4 young ladies who have set out to go explore this cave system because they're looking for a subterranean lake that they've only heard about in legend and rumors, but they're pretty sure it exists and they want to go find it because they're thrill seekers, and so they have set out on this adventure. And it does have 2 different timelines going on. You have the current time, which it starts out when they're talking to the one girl who is coherent and is able to talk, and then you flip back to the event when they were actually in the cave exploring. And this is really trippy. There are really weird things happening. The visuals, the imagery that it gave me, this would make a really good movie as well. If you like cave horror and you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. It also gave me very light bunny vibes. Like The Honeys also kind of gave me light vibes like that too. Almost culty kind of vibes, but like there's weird things, like they're not necessarily friends. There's still something tying them together, and then there's really weird things that are happening. And the reason why these weird things are happening is because this cave or underground lake, it supposedly has some kind of power over people where it shows you your fears. And that will be unique to every individual. It will show you your personal fears. And so it's almost like a bad trip in a way. Like each of these girls is going to the same place, but they're also experiencing different things at the same time. I love this kind of survival adventure horror. This was really good, especially when it has something to say about your own fears and insecurities and the dark places that you work through. If you're looking for cave horror, I definitely recommend this one. Okay friends, that will do it for my 15 favorite horror books that I read last year. Let me know if you've read any of these or you've added any to your TBR. And if you have made it this far and would like to leave an emoji, go ahead and leave any kind of emoji that's related to horror. So a knife, a ghost, a skull, something like that. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.